Okay guys, in today's video we have some PlayStation related news and information to go over here. The first thing we're going to talk about is Death Stranding once again, and apparently how some user scores were actually removed from Metacritic and it actually bumped up the overall user score for Death Stranding. I know a lot of you are very interested in this. A lot of you have been asking me to talk about it, so we're going to go over that in this video. We're also going to talk a little bit about what Naughty Dog had to say about the PlayStation 5's SSD, which we know is going to really cut down on load times or essentially remove them altogether. And it seems like Naughty Dog is very excited about what they're going to be able to achieve with this aspect of the PlayStation 5 hardware. And finally, we're going to be talking about Hermen Hulst, who is currently the head of Sony's worldwide studios. He's in charge of Sony's first-party efforts, and he is going to be the individual who greenlights games going into next generation and essentially gets to determine which games are going to be made for PlayStation in the future. And he actually gave his overall philosophy, his approach to game creation recently, and I feel as though it is actually pretty important to go over that and discuss that, considering he is in charge, and maybe it gives us a little bit of a glimpse as to what we can expect going forward. But starting here with Death Stranding, it says that Death Stranding has been a hit with most critics, but the game was rather predictably review bombed over on Metacritic by users. As often is the case with titles that end up dividing opinion for whatever reason, a tug of war very quickly ensued, with many users awarding the game a perfect 10, while others slapped it with a big fat 0. It wasn't long before the overall user score dropped to around 5.1. The same user score has spiked dramatically over the last 24 hours, however. As explained on Reddit, it appears as though over 6,000 negative ratings have been removed by the site, causing the score to jump. Death Stranding now sits at a user score of 7.4. This isn't the first time that Metacritic has tidied up its user scores, and it's likely it won't be the last. We will struggle to wrap our heads around why people would waste their time doing this to begin with. So yeah, I actually found this incredibly interesting because one thing we did talk about when we discussed Death Stranding is how divisive the game is, and on Metacritic it did actually get review bombed. If you looked at a lot of the reviews, and there are a lot of user reviews, and you actually look into it a little bit, you would see that a lot of people were either just blatantly giving it 10s, and there was just a lot of either bots or just accounts that were just made for this purpose. They had no history, right? And the same thing with giving it 0s and 1s and all this stuff. And we discussed this, and I don't think it's really worth paying too much attention to here, but I think this is actually a good thing. I know that there's going to be some people who are like, this is unfair, Death Stranding, this is like fraudulent or whatever, but I don't think it is. I'm pretty sure Metacritic is only removing the scores that are just blatantly, obviously not really being genuine or honest, and that includes the 10 out of 10 scores as well, I believe, not just the low scores. And it's trying to retain the user scores that seem like they're actually legitimate, and I'm actually all for that. That's how it should be, and I think that 7.4 is a much more accurate representation of how the majority of people feel playing Death Stranding or after playing Death Stranding, right? And it's more in line with overall with what the critics thought of Death Stranding as well. I think it sitting at a 5.1 definitely didn't do it justice, because you know that there was just so many scores there giving it a 0 out of 10, and it's just like you can't really go based off that, because I don't think many people would agree just looking at Death Stranding, the quality of it in general, regardless of whether you think it's a fun game or not, just the overall quality of it, it's not a 5 out of 10 game. So yeah, I think it's a good thing, and I'm happy to see that Metacritic actually took care of that. I hope they do that for other games as well, including Microsoft games, any games that have this done to them. It's unfair, it's not cool, and the only reviews that should be there are the ones that are clearly genuine. So yeah, moving on from that, we are going to be talking about Naughty Dog and what they had to say about the PlayStation 5's SSD. It says here that Naughty Dog president Evan Wells has touched base on the PS5 load times, which are set to eliminate traditional loading screens thanks to the application of an SSD. It's this feature in particular that has Wells most excited for Sony's next-generation console. Speaking with The Verge, Wells made it clear that the PS5 SSD will be a game changer when it comes to traditional load times. So he goes on to say here, I think the solid state drive will allow us to deliver content in a way that has no friction for the players. They'll never have to wait to dive back into their games. I sort of miss the smaller scale, fast development, quick turnaround where your entire team is in one room and communication is shouting over your shoulder, but the results that we can achieve now on these bigger games and the lasting impact it has on the player is so worth it. So yeah, this was actually an interesting quote because it really shows that the developers, over there at Naughty Dog, we know how talented they are. We know that they are at the forefront of game development and cutting edge technology and implementations of new techniques. I think that much is clear with the games that they release and what we've been hearing about The Last of Us Part 2. It's going to be exciting to see what they're going to do with the PlayStation 5 hardware in general, and clearly the SSD is going to play a very big role in that, and specifically load times. Hearing that there's going to be a lot less friction for gamers, this is one of the aspects that has me very excited about the PS5, is we don't really think about it too much, right? But loading times and limited bandwidth and being able to just kind of not seamlessly transition from things in games, it can kind of break up the flow a lot in some games, and a lot of developers try to find workarounds for it, but in some cases there's just no way around it. It's going to be really interesting to experience games where this is just not a problem, like you're just never taken out of the game or the experience because there's no load times, you're not waiting for anything ever. That's actually pretty exciting, and I'm very excited to see what Naughty Dog is going to be able to achieve with that SSD going into next gen with whatever games they choose to create. So yeah, I thought that was worth sharing there. But the last thing we're going to cover here has to do with Sony Worldwide Studios boss Hermen Hulst giving his philosophy on game development. So it says, it's no longer Shuhei Yoshida you need to beg for Bloodborne 2 because the role of Worldwide Studios president has been handed to ex-Guerrilla Games managing director Hermen Hulst. The Dutchman hasn't been in the role long, and so we're hearing from him for the first time as part of a feature on PlayStation's impressive 25th anniversary in Game Informer magazine, which, for those of you who don't know, the big cover story for Game Informer this month has to do with PlayStation's 25th anniversary, and they've actually revealed a lot of really interesting information. I would highly recommend going and checking it out if you haven't. There's a lot of cool stuff there that has been done. I think Game Informer did an excellent job with that. But it says here that here's what he had to say about the state of games. So this is the quote. Games have now fully entered the mainstream of pop culture media. That is both amazing and exciting. Our challenge as creators is to be meaningful to so many people while simultaneously cherishing the counter-cultural aspects that make gaming the quirky, odd, off-kilter, surprising, and sometimes shocking expressions that they need to be. Our collective voices as game devs have become more diverse and therefore more interesting as a result. It's exciting to look at a future where people around the world start seeing games as something significant, something sincere, and worthwhile. So I actually think that this is a really significant quote because I actually fully support what he's saying here. I mean, he obviously could just be saying this as like PR or whatnot, but I think what he's saying is genuine. What he's saying is, as the person who's going to be in charge to determine the portfolio of games going forward that we get from Sony Studios, what he's going to greenlight, what he's not going to greenlight, it's very critical that we have an understanding of where his stance is. And it sounds to me like he has the understanding, and this is very important in my opinion, he has the understanding that when it comes to gaming, there is a fine balance where there are these games that are very serious, and we see this from Sony. This is, I think, what Sony does best, if I'm being honest. These very serious, impactful, meaningful gaming experiences that absolutely need to play a huge role within all of gaming, but specifically we see how big of a role it plays with PlayStation games. And I think it's clear that he understands that, right? We saw what he did with Horizon Zero Dawn, and, we see what's going to happen with games like The Last of Us Part 2 and, with game like God of War in 2018. But he's also, sure to highlight here that it's not all about that when it comes to games, they are very diverse, and there's a lot of stuff that's maybe weird, quirky as he puts it, and just things that are not really expected, things that you just at first don't really think like, wait, does this kind of fit in Sony's portfolio? But then you realize actually it does. It has its place, because I think most gamers can agree with this, the statement I'm about to make, where a lot of the games that we play, they don't have to all be the most serious gaming experiences, right? Like, I like to have a selection where if I want to have that deep, meaningful experience, I want that to be there, and I want that to be an option, obviously, and I want it to be really good. But not every time I sit down and play a video game do I feel like that's what I need to have. It doesn't always need to be like that. It's just like anything else, right? Like just reading different books, experiencing different movies, watching different TV shows. And I just feel like this is really important to highlight because his answer here could have been way worse than this. I mean, he could have been completely off the mark, but I think there's a reason why Sony trusts him and why Shuhei Yoshida is now going to play this important role where, people try to make it sound like Shuhei Yoshida got demoted. Like, no, he didn't. I highly doubt he got demoted. He played his part, and he proved that he knows what he's doing in that role, but now he wants to take on a role, and Sony wants him to take on a role where he's going to be working more with indie developers, and I think that he has that wisdom, and it's better that he passes that down, and now Hermen Hulst, he's the new blood here in terms of this role, but he's a game creator as well, and I feel like it's a perfect thing that Sony has going on here, and I just think that what Hermen Hulst is saying here is actually incredibly important and really grounded. And honestly, again, every time I hear Sony talk about gaming and their plans and their outlooks, their views, I find that I'm agreeing with almost all of it, pretty much all of it, and they're saying the things that I'm just like, yeah, that sounds great to me. Like, I want Sony to continue to make these meaningful, impactful games, but I don't want them to only do that. I want them to do some weird experimental stuff too. I mean, Dreams is a perfect example of that, right? So that's going to do it for the video, guys. I thought that this was all very interesting information that you guys would also be interested in, so be sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments below about any of these topics we discussed. Be sure to also leave the video a like if you did enjoy it. It's the easiest way for you guys to let me know you enjoy the content and appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.